The gate wasn't supposed to be opened, not by her, not without a notice, not with that look in her eyes. I found the latch undone at dawn, the sprinklers still sighing, and a soggy pair of sunglasses on the patio chair like someone had left a calling card. That's the moment everything split into before and after. My name's Tom Randall, and I live on a crooked little street nobody thinks about until someone decides it's theirs. We moved to Cedar Mesa for the quiet. My wife, Lisa, and me, 2 dogs, a stubborn old truck, and a pool that felt like a private ocean in the heat. For 3 years the neighbors waved. The mail came. The HOA filed the occasional polite complaint about mailbox paint. Then Mara DeWitt showed up with a clipboard and a smile that never reached her eyes, and the neighborhood learned how small etiquette can become a weapon. Mara was the type who collected rules like trophies. She ran the Cedar Mesa Coven official title, board president, and treated the coven like a fiefdom. Her power came from paperwork, bylaws, sign-in sheets, signatures that smelled like authority. She liked being right more than she liked being liked. And that was the first time she walked through a gate that wasn't hers, sneaking into my backyard to test the water temperature, as if some private luxury offended her more than it thrilled her. I could tell you how ridiculous it looked, a 70-something woman in sensible shoes stepping into my shallow inn like she owned the afternoon, but what mattered wasn't the laugh. It was the way she looked at the property, like she was measuring it against the scale on her clipboard, like my life was a blemish to be sanded down. I grabbed my phone, recorded the clip, because in 2024 footage is evidence, and sometimes it's a mirror. When I posted that short clip to our neighborhood chat, I expected the usual, a couple of gasps, a few jokes. Instead, it detonated. People picked sides faster than you can say coven. Some remembered Mara as the volunteer who organized the holiday lights. Others recalled a string of petty fines she'd pushed through. Old tensions surfaced. Power, envy, the difference between being a neighbor and being a judge. What I didn't expect was the retaliation. First, it was passive-aggressive. A typed notice slipped under my door about an unapproved deck umbrella, then a formal complaint to the county about unauthorized alterations. Those were bites. The real teeth came later. One night, the pool pump clattered itself to death. Another morning, the security cam was sliced clean off its mount. Someone drained half the pool while Lisa slept, leaving a chalky ring and a note that read, "Lesson learned." That last bit the handwriting. The small theatrical flourish felt intimate, like a threat written by someone who knew exactly where it would hurt. I thought about calling the cops. I thought about confronting Mara at the next HOA meeting and naming her the old-school way, face-to-face. But something in me recoiled from the script everyone expects. Outrage, a shouted confession, a quick victory. Instead, I did what people like me do when they've spent their lives building things. I built proof. We moved the cameras, taped the pumps with timestamp stickers, rerouted power through a surge I could monitor. I spent nights drinking too much coffee and watching grainy footage, waiting for the ghost of the neighborhood to show a hand. When Mara came again, that was the night she learned I'd been waiting. She stepped onto my property after dark, the same indignant posture, only colder, and reached for the cover because my pool had been closed for repairs. I stepped out into the light and said, "Do you mind?" The camera caught every second, her surprised blink, that tiny human pause before the mask snapped back on. "You should know better," she snapped, voice sharp like metal. "This community can't tolerate. You can't tolerate me?" I asked. I didn't say you can't tolerate my pool. I said, you can't tolerate me. Because the fight wasn't about chlorine or deck screws. It was about being policed in your own life. She laughed then, a sound that sounded like a calculation. "We tolerate rules," she said. "Rules keep us civilized." "And who decides the rules?" I asked, and there it was the line. She wanted obedience. I wanted to keep my home. We stood there, 2 people on opposite sides of an invisible border, and someone filmed us being human and furious. That clip crossed a line. Mara escalated openly after that. Forged complaints, petitions with shaky signatures, even a forged towing order that had my truck towed at dawn one Sunday. The board, which had been comfortable in the blur, rallied behind her because she kept their schedules tidy and their meetings civilized. The neighborhood split down the middle, people texting like soldiers planning skirmishes. I felt the calm I'd moved here for cracking under the pressure of small-scale war. But aggression has costs, and the more Mara pushed, the more reckless she became. One night, she tried something that could have been dangerous, a chemical spill meant to discolor the pool and make it unsanitary. She wanted witnesses to the mess, a visual justification for fines, for public opinion. She wanted the moral narrative to swing in her favor. She didn't expect me to be home that night, and she certainly didn't expect me to be waiting with a flashlight and a camera. When she slipped near the edge, the bucket toppled, and she fell in, spluttering and cursing. I pulled her out, dripping and furious and coughing. I could have walked away. I could have let the cameras explain it later. Instead, I leaned down and said, "You okay?" She stared at me, soaked and furious, and then, quietly, "You could have called for help." I wanted to say, "Help with what?" A neighborhood witch hunt. Instead, I helped her to a chair. It was the strangest moment, a man who'd been pushed into a fight extending a hand to the person who'd lit it. Things changed after that, not in the way I expected. The police came because someone called, of course, and the story turned legal. The county investigator was patient and precise, and for the first time the backyard became a stack of documents rather than a theater of grudges. Mara's carefully curated image cracked under the weight of paperwork she had assumed would protect her. Old grievances the board had swallowed suddenly had names attached. People started talking in longer sentences, adults remembering logistics and leases and signatures. The tide shifted because there's a different kind of shame, the kind that lives in an official folder. But victory didn't arrive like a movie. Mara wasn't carted off. The board didn't combust. Instead, the HOA quietly voted her off the board. She moved out 2 months later, not in a hurry, but with the same clipped dignity she'd carried into meetings. Some neighbors cheered. Others whispered that we'd all lost something: civility, maybe, or a sense of certainty. I felt both relief and a hollow that surprised me. If power had been her only language, removing her didn't change the rules, it only changed the speaker. In the quiet that followed, I found myself leafing through the archive I'd built. Clips, emails, invoices, a folder I labeled accountability. I did it more out of habit than hope. A guy who once put a foundation under a house by measuring 3 times. There was a note slipped into the folder one morning, anonymous, typed, that said, "Thanks for exposing the rot." No signature. No closure. Sometimes at night I sit on the back steps and watch the pool reflect the moon and think about how taste and power and petty jealousies can stitch themselves into a community like poison ivy. I think about Mara as a person stubborn, uncompromising, scared of losing control, and I realize how small-scale empires grow in small towns. Someone who organizes the bake sale becomes someone who can organize your day, and underneath that, someone who fears being insignificant. If there's a lesson here, it's not a simple one. Don't let your life be micromanaged. Yes, but also don't mistake exposure for healing. There are cracks in every neighborhood, under every porch, and sometimes exposing a rot feels like victory until you see how the light exposes other things you didn't know were rotten. I want to fight, and I lost an innocence I didn't know I had. The yard is quieter. The cameras still hum. The truck sleeps in the driveway. Lisa makes coffee the same way she always has, and the dogs still bark at the mailman. So here's where I want to hear you. What would you have done? Public exposure or quiet litigation? Community standards or personal boundaries? Drop a comment and tell me which side of the fence you'd stand on, because I know this story isn't just mine, it's every cul-de-sac where someone decides they own the rules. If you've got an HOA horror or a neighbor who pushed too far, share it below. Keep it real, keep it specific. And if you like this, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and tell a friend, because these neighborhood dramas aren't just gossip, they're lessons in how we live together. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.